Hello, everybody. Welcome to Philosophy Friday. Today, we're going to be talking about the case for assholes. Now, many companies today have a no assholes hiring policy. And the characterization here is that there may be a high performer, but if that person is an asshole, which is never really defined, then that creates a team that actually underperforms and creates a hostile work environment. Even further, there's a lot of talk about the importance of EQ or emotional intelligence, where the common interpretation of this is that managers should always try to actively diffuse conflicts and make sure everyone always feels good and safe. And so, in many companies, the interpretation here is that based on EQ, like the greatest sin you can commit is for someone, even an underperformer, to feel bad. On the other hand, the most successful performers in the world are, in my opinion, considered assholes. Whether it's Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, or in the gaming industry, someone like Corey Barlog, or even athletes like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. So today, I want to discuss a controversial perspective. I think there are different kinds of assholes, and that in fact, for startups and for doing 0 to 1 types of creation, good assholes are oftentimes required. Further, I think that the real assholes, the bad assholes, are the ones who are liars. They're cowards. They're not able to give direct feedback. They lie to your face. And while you may feel safe, I believe the common wisdom of being superficially and externally nice and then firing people with no warning. Now, isn't that the true asshole? So, unfortunately, I believe we live in a world that has shifted to have an extreme focus on feelings. And we would rather compromise a business or helping someone improve in favor of having everyone in the office with happy smiles. And just to throw a little bit of additional spice onto our discussion today, Brett, and as we always do here on Philosophy Friday, I'd like to end with some discussion on my perspective on the current political environment, in which I believe it's actually dangerous to be labeled an asshole. I felt this topic was specifically important to discuss, not only to highlight the nuances of being an asshole, but as we are now dealing with a very hostile and adversarial political environment. I mean, I just want to highlight the dangers of being targeted by those seeking to take people down, by ideological mobs who are actively seeking to attack people who don't follow their ideologies. So a lot here. I just went on a little bit of a diatribe here, but before we jump in, Brett, it has been a minute. It's been a little while since we last talked. So glad to have you back on. So before we dive in, what do you think about this conversation we're about to have today? And what have you been up to?
Well, I love the conversation. I feel like it's something that I experienced a ton while working in other companies and something I've tried to address at Liquid and Grit. And I think it's an important topic politically and in our life in general, right? I think business, politics, and life are one of the same. There's no separation. And it is causing, like you said, some unintentional consequences, right? The intent is good, but the unintentional consequences can be very bad. In terms of what I've been up to, we're always up to a lot of stuff at Liquid and Grid. I could rattle off all the things that have happened since the last one, but we like did our online tool, renamed it the Impact Portal. It's super sexy looking now, very cohesive, awesome design. We expanded into the racing and sports market with a market report and tracking.
Nice.
We have seen a lot of success in our new tracker tool, which is for live ops. We are about to launch an awesome impact report where I have a PhD level person doing awesome analysis on our data and Sensor Towers data, which is I'm pretty excited about. And we're starting to build out a wiki that is going to be like super awesome and hard to do. And like we're doing just so much stuff, JK.
Great.
We're always
Yeah,
doing,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Sounds great. So maybe we could start off this conversation with how do we define an asshole, right? Because obviously, as I mentioned before, many companies do have this notion of no assholes policy, but again, has not been well defined. But for you, Brett, how would you define it?
Yeah, I mean, I did the classic look it up because it's always a good place to start, but really it starts out with actually the word stupid, which is kind of interesting in in sort of the classic definition, but I
Okay.
do find that that is something that kind of goes along with it is really not thinking before they're acting, right? Irritating, um contemptible person, right? And somebody who can't get along well with others, but in a sort of low ROI way, right? Like it's like over something stupid. Adds unnecessary criticism or angst. Bad communicator, like really bad. I think there's a really gray area because that's such a arbitrary thing to define. And then someone who really attacks the person and not the product or the work, right? And I think that's something that's super important when defining who is an asshole, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think from my perspective, so my definition really talks about two kinds of criteria when I think about an asshole. And the first is around the style of communication, and the second criteria is around psychological safety. So, in terms of communication style, the first criteria, I think an asshole is someone who's very direct in their communication and doesn't prioritize a person's feelings. So, that's, as I mentioned before, I do think that that's like a real big area of focus for a lot of people right now, is for people to feel safe, to feel good, right? So the second is psychological safety, meaning this kind of increasingly popular notion of having people feel safe at work. And I think this can take different forms, right? Like, for example, there's physical safety, and I think I think people should feel safe about not having physical harm done to them at the workplace. But then the second part is really around how safe you feel about your job or job security. And so in this scenario, you can have an asshole who's very direct in their communication. I like that nuance that you brought up, Brett. That in like maybe a I would say a bad asshole is someone who attacks a person versus attacking the issue. I do think you should attack the issue, but generally, like those two things, feelings, like the asshole doesn't prioritize the feelings, and second, psychological safety. I think an asshole will let an employee know that their job is not safe if things don't change. And so, from my perspective, I think that there are also good and bad assholes. And so, to your, to the point I'm making, for example, around communication style, you can have an asshole who doesn't prioritize feelings, so they're going to make somebody feel bad. But I would say a bad asshole is the person that's actually attacking the person, to your point, rather than, and maybe a good asshole is the person who's attacking the issue very directly. Um, and I also think it's the one of the big problems is that, uh, and I think it's good that we're starting with this definition, because I feel like too many people have not thought about this too deeply. So it's like we have a no assholes policy, but what is an asshole? And then different people are going to have different conceptions of what that is. And so by not having that clearly defined, but having really like like a very visible and surfaced policy or philosophy at a company, then I think that creates problems and can actually cause a company with a no assholes policy to eliminate what, in my opinion, may be people who are well intentioned and who actually have, um, who are actually good for the company, but they get kind of swept out with this no assholes policy because the definition isn't made clear. Okay, so maybe we could
Yeah.
talk. Or did you have
And
any
it's just
thoughts?
funny. I think it's just a funny concept too, because
Yeah.
nobody goes in. I mean, 99% of people don't go in interviews, and if they are an asshole, they don't display it, right? It's not like you go in the interview and you're like, "Fuck you, dude." Like, everyone acts nice. Everyone can kind of fake it, right? So it's just kind
Yeah.
of an interesting policy, and no asshole. So I
Yeah.
agree. It's sort of like you need to define it, otherwise, and then otherwise, it's kind of arbitrary in how you get reviewed, right?
Right. Yeah, I do remember I did have a job interview once before, and I think one of the questions was around, what are some things that people may have to be concerned about me? And actually, I responded. I said, well, some people do consider me an asshole, and then I tried to go into the nuance and explain this, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it went really bad.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But yeah, this
What
is
time
like
is this
five
interview
years ago.
over? Yeah.
but um, but maybe we could also like as a next topic talk about this notion of psychological safety. And this is, in my opinion, a term that's become very popular, and along with the notion of the importance of EQ and the common wisdom of best practice for managers is that they should have high EQ. And but let just kind of getting more to the point, maybe the question I can ask you, Brett, around this topic of psychological safety is, what is more important, the feeling or perception of safety in terms of job security at work, or alternatively, the direct communication and maintaining a standard of performance?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like when you go find someone you know is going to give you the advice that you want to hear. I feel like
Well, I know you read Jocko,
you've
so
come and asked the
it's a
person
little.
that is like comes from like professional hockey and like the sports world where there's no such thing as EQ or the consideration of
Right.
your feelings, and then went to Zynga and then started his own company, right? So I'm all about the standard of performance. And interestingly, the interesting thing about that is if you're clear about it from day one and it is something part of your culture, it is clearly defined, you're much less likely to be considered an asshole, right? Like when I tell people about some of the things we do at Liquid and Grit, they perceive me to be an asshole, or that other people in my company perceive me to be an asshole. But the
Yeah.
thing about it is, it's not true. I mean, people they don't. I mean, obviously, I'm biased, but for the most part, I get very good feedback because it's straight. It's a standard way I interact with people from day one, day 30, day 360, year four, right? There's no ambiguity and there's no change. And it was upfront from the beginning that this is the way it was going to be. And so they opted into it, right? And it's all about the standard of performance, our interview process, our hiring process, how we critique you in the first month, how we critique you in the first year. It's all standard of performance, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's so important because the way and it was hard for me because I am someone who sort of has that softer side, surprisingly. I mean, you might not think that, but I do. And it was hard for me to be a leader in an organization where I am also like letting go of people and ending contracts so frequently. And I did things to protect myself from that. But the way that I frame it in my mind is that, and I think you're alluding to a lot of this, is ultimately I'm less of an asshole because I do that, because in the long run, for the people that are doing their job and doing a great job, I'm keeping their job. Right. And I
Yeah.
always sort of say to people, it's like, my goal here is to make it so you can work at Liquid and Grit for the rest of your life if you want to. Your job is to be a competent worker and do your job and do it well,
Yeah.
right? Do your job well. So if we both do those things, theoretically, I can run Liquid and Grit for the rest of life, and you can work here for the rest of your life. Like that's the agreement I'm going to make. But to make that agreement actually true for the rest of our life, I'm talking for 60, 60 years.
Mhm.
I have to look at the long term niceness, right? And the long term niceness is this person isn't doing his or her job and they need to go, right? Like they're not performing well. And it's the collective niceness that I'm looking at rather than the individual niceness. And I didn't actually think of that, but that's really the difference I think that happens when people define and get labeled an asshole inaccurately.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned your background in, as a hockey player, for example, and from sports, because in sports, it's all about performance, right? To your point, you either perform or you're going to get replaced or you get fired. That happens in professional sports all the time, and it's funny because I think a lot of people, especially here in Silicon Valley, hold kind of conflicting philosophies in their mind. Netflix famously popularized this notion of their company and their philosophy of not being a family, but they're more of a team, or they're more like a professional sports team. And so, companies like Netflix and many other companies, if you were to ask the typical Silicon Valley person, what kind of company do you work for? Then they're like, are you a family or are you a professional sports team? They're gonna be like, oh, we're a professional sports team. Yeah, we're all about performance. And then if you ask them what's your assholes policy, they're gonna be like, nope, no assholes. And
Yeah.
this notion of psychological safety, then, so it comes back. So coming back to this, in a professional sports team, you do not have psychological safety. It is about competition, and so I think like these two conflicting philosophies, many people in Silicon Valley keep both in their mind, despite the fact that it is actually not in alignment. And I know this is a topic that can get really emotional for people. And again, the common wisdom here is that great managers have great EQ, or emotional intelligence, and that it's absolutely critical for employees to feel safe at work. But I think that, and like this belief though that people should always feel safe about their job. I just think that doesn't work. And especially when you're holding this conflicting view of being a professional sports team. And so the question I would ask people is that, if you believe in this philosophy of safety, then, how do you ever give direct feedback? Should you never, keep performance as a standard? Is that what if an employee has terrible performance? And so if this were the case, then no employee would ever be let go, regardless of what kind of performance they have. And so, uh, I just think that, I don't know, if you're trying to run a business, or if you're trying to run a company for performance, which is especially to the point about when you're starting a new startup, performance is so much more important, that you can't have this notion of psychological safety. And we know that in some of these best performing companies like Elon Musk at Tesla, it's been reported many times where he's told employees, hey, get this done by Monday or you're fired. He's made a lot of these kinds of directives in which people's jobs are threatened very directly unless changes happen. And I actually think that that's one thing to note is, and maybe another topic we can go into, is that I also believe, and we've talked about this before in terms of the concept of can people change, that without that direct feedback, without like, if you have to have psychological safety and you can never threaten somebody's job and they must always feel safe, then you can't get people to change, because people are so hard to change that you have to have a lot of stakes in order for change to happen, in my opinion. But before we go on to another topic, Brett, any thoughts?
I have so many. Yeah, I mean, I just remember one quick story. I remember when I became a lead at Zynga, the first question I asked my boss was, "How do I get rid of people?" And I remember him saying, like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "We run $1 billion game, and I've been here for almost 2 years, and we haven't gotten rid of one person, right?
Yeah,
We're 80, 100 people, and you're telling me all these people are high performers, because there's several on my team that are total slackers, and they need to go. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think it's a little bit fear led in that they don't want to get sued and all this stuff. But realistically, the fear should be the long term fear, in that the company itself is going to hurt, and then you're going to have to be forced to, right? And
yeah,
it's like, that's something that is a mission of Liquid and Grits, is like, we're trying, and I took this from Toyota, which is like, we're trying to control our own destiny, right? And to control your own destiny, you have to kind of like head straight into hard stuff. Otherwise, the world forces you to do hard stuff, right? Which
yeah,
is, very specifically, you need to let people go proactively, or your performance is going to get to a point where you need to lay off people, right? And there are a lot of factors that go into laying off and firing people and all that stuff. But in general, I feel like that is the case, where it's like the world doing it. And I do have, since this is Philosophy Thursday, I have thought about this and I do have a
Okay.
philosophy around why it is this way.
Okay.
And I think it's because we are optimizing and preparing for the known. Okay. And what does that mean? That means that what we're doing is we're creating a system that prepares us for what we believe tomorrow to be. Okay. And what we believe tomorrow to be in general, in a lot of cases, is a very optimistic viewpoint, right? It's a bias of humans to think, and it's based on what we're seeing right now, right? Oh, like the world is safe, we're safe, the economy is going positive, our company is growing, relax, chill out, everyone have happy hour all day long, let's enjoy ourselves, tomorrow's going to be just like today, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that's works only if tomorrow is just like today. And when tomorrow isn't like today and it's revenue went down, something happened, there's a huge crash, a competitors in the market all of a sudden. Well, then you got to turn on the asshole, right? Move. You got to like, hey, everyone, get going. It's too late. It's too late. It's already
Yeah.
here, right? The attack is already here.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's like only the paranoid will survive. And like that's the way you got to operate. Like there's so many moments that I've done something to somebody in my company. I know they're like, why is this guy giving me a hard time about this, right? Like I booked a meeting with him. He has no meetings, right? I wrote an email that was a page long, and he's telling me to make it like I haven't emailed him in a month, and he's telling me to make it one paragraph. Like I pinged him on Slack when I knew I should have just sent him an email. It's like, why is he giving me shit for all this stuff? It's like because, dude, like yeah, times are fine now, but what happens when we're 10x the size? What happens when we have a competitor? What happens when a recession happens? Right? It'll be too late for me to clean up all this stuff. You know what I mean? Like I gotta
Yeah.
be vigilant right now. I gotta be, to your point, that asshole that says that uncomfortable thing right now, knowing that I don't have it. I've got plenty of time. I could sit here and read this email, but
Yeah.
like it's not done right. It's not done in a way that's going to prepare us for the unknown of tomorrow, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing that the leaders have to think about. That creates, I think, some of this asshole definition, right?
Right.
Or makes it necessary.
Yeah, and maybe one point that you mentioned in terms of, working on a $1 billion game. And so like when you do have a product that's successful and you're making profit, I think that is an environment in which you don't necessarily need like what I would call the good assholes to help direct performance, improve things, because there's a lot of fat in the system, right? And you can have fat, to your point, but maybe you shouldn't have that, because sometimes not the time when if times change and things become bad, then kind of you get exposed for having a lot of problems. But maybe one other point that I can make, just so that we can kind of close the loop in this on this notion of psychological safety, is like one point I didn't mention is that I do think that there should always be psychological safety with respect to communication, meaning like you should people in a company should always feel safe to say exactly how they feel. Any criticism, comments, direct feedback, I believe there should be safety around communication, but that this guaranteed safety around your job, regardless of your performance, is something that I just don't think works, especially for, if you are in that situation where you don't have a team that's working on an existing product that's profitable. If you're trying to make a new product with limited budget, money's running out, you have to have performance. And so this, I guess maybe the next topic then that I would want to talk to you then about is, so then like then who truly is an asshole, right? So many people are like, okay, yeah, this guy who's like you might have been considered an asshole for, for pointing out
Lots of times.
small
Lots
things
of times.
that right, for the direct communication about performance, where you're telling people how you think that they could improve. And so I just want to open up this discussion and ask our audience also, this question is like, who truly is an asshole? Is it the person who makes you feel good, or the person who tells you the truth? And I'll turn it over to you in a minute, Brett. But I think for me, the biggest thing that people are missing here is this notion of intent. And I think this is so important because for me, the difference between the good and the bad asshole all comes down to intent. Like, are you as a manager or leader, are you trying to bully somebody? Are you trying to threaten someone just for, just because you can? Or are you invested in that person? Are you trying to help someone to become a better person? I mean, my kids could call me an asshole. They're my family. I love my kids. But am I letting them do whatever they want? I had one of my oldest son was taking a math program, and I was traveling to India, whatever, and I came back one time and I realized that he hadn't done his homework or done anything in 5 weeks, right? I wasn't checking up on him, and you better believe I was very very direct in my expectations, and I was very harsh with them. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that I think the good asshole, and I don't consider myself a bad father. I consider myself a good father because I love my son. I'm giving him that direct feedback. I'm not trying to bully or threaten him. I'm trying to make him better. I'm invested in him. And I also think it's so disappointing because the common practice, in my opinion, and just literally within the past 2 to 3 years, I've had 5 friends who were fired, and the common theme amongst all 5 of those people, not in like every case, there's other cases where it's clear, but with these 5 in particular, the common theme that I heard from them was, "Wow, I had no idea I was going to be fired. It was a complete surprise." And in one particular case, my friend was telling me about how she was let go, and was mentioning like during the offboarding meeting, the manager was crying, like crying as they let my friend go. And I mean, I guess I don't want to go into the specifics, but it was very clear that this specific manager literally had zero ability to give any form of negative feedback. And it was so hard for them that giving that feedback and actually speaking truth was so emotionally difficult that they were like literally crying when they were giving them that feedback about, okay, you're fired, surprise, you're fired, and they just couldn't do it. um and I think, alternatively, at my company, we give very direct feedback, we expect change, and I think that's also another nuance that I think is important, is that I think that in some cases, people may not give direct feedback because they just, and we've had this argument before, can people change or not? I agree with you in the sense that it's very difficult, but which is why we need to be harsh. But I think that what I've seen is that when you give that direct feedback, you're actually investing in that person. You're believing that that person can change. That's why you give the direct feedback. And for the people who think people can't change, yeah, you're probably not going to give direct feedback because you're like, well, people can't change. I'll just be nice. I'll play the politics game. And then when it comes time, it's like, hey, surprise, you're sorry, you're fired. Let me just hire somebody else because I, and to some degree, I think that's kind of giving up as a manager, right? As a manager, are you somebody who can help change and improve somebody's performance or not? And if you don't believe in yourself and don't think you can, yeah, of course you just surprise somebody and say, hey, sorry, you're fired. I'm going to try to find somebody else who's better because I can't manage this person. Getting back to the original question, who's the asshole? In my opinion, it really goes back to this notion, this concept of intent. Are you intending to help improve this person, or are you just trying to be a mean person? What do you think, Brett?
I, I I'm gonna rephrase it, and then I'm gonna add to your point. And I think what you're saying is you have to understand what your end goal is. And what happens in business is people forget what their end goal is. For example, I hear people say this all the time, like my job as a manager is to serve my like employees or whatever. And I'm just like, I mean, maybe that's part of your job, but really your job is to make the company successful so that you all can have a job, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the core of your job, right? Like serving your employees, if that's something that helps make your company more successful, then great. But sitting around and going, all I do is serve my employees without understanding the higher level goal, you're going to start doing what you're talking about, which is this fake. This is you're sort of fake nice, but are really an asshole because in like 2 years the company's going to explode. And I love the point you brought up about parenting because I think it's very applicable because I've thought about this as well. And this is what I'm going to add to it. I think again, now we're sort of changing the goal of the parent, right? The goal of the parent is now to be friends with the kid, right? Is to like have this wonderful relationship with our children, which is very nice. I'm a parent of three boys. It's and it is a nice component to have, but ultimately the goal of a parent is prepare our children for the real world. That is ultimately our goal. It's
Right.
not to be best friends with our children.
That's
Okay,
right. Yeah.
it's to prepare them for the real world. And I have thought about this and discussed this actually recently with my coach is it's actually good for us to be an asshole to our children. And I think I'm going to apply this to business. It may actually be good for us to be an asshole to our an actual asshole to our employees every once in a while. And the reason being is because what we are doing as parents is preparing our children for the real world. So if they never experience an interaction with an asshole at home with someone that they know loves them,
Yeah.
then, and I always think about it in gaming, then they're basically going into the real world having never experienced an asshole. And the real world asshole is going to be way more intense than your parents, right? The, your son's
Yeah.
teacher, your son's boss, your son's like the SATs, all those things, or GMAT, wherever they take these days, those aren't going to sugarcoat the answer. Like, well, we know you got all math problems wrong, but we're going to give you a really high score, right? That's not how it works.
Yeah.
So it is actually, in a weird way, our job to be an asshole to our children, actually. And in some ways, when you are an asshole, it's actually a good thing. It's a weird thing. And I think the same thing holds for business as well, because one thing on the other side, on the receiving side, is this sensitivity that everyone has to any little thing that isn't
Yes.
exactly right. God forbid that person said something that I interpreted not perfectly and didn't make me feel warm and fuzzy inside, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, of course, we all want to be the most articulate, Obama like communicator, right? We all want to be that person, but we're not.
Yeah.
Okay, there's only one Obama. There's only one whoever else you hold high regard of communication skills, right?
Yeah.
And in a working environment, we all have to give each other the benefit of the doubt, because the person receiving that like poor communication from their boss has to then understand that when they're communicating with the developers, when they're communicating with the artists, when they're communicating with someone else, they might say something that's an asshole thing to say or a mean thing to say. And that person is going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And that person is going to do the same thing. And it's a culture that accepts less than perfect fucking communication. Okay.
Right.
Because it's like we're not these like unbelievably great communicators, right? So we have to
Yeah.
also experience, and that has to come from the top, right? So I'm adding to this, which I'm saying it's actually good for leaders to sometimes poorly communicate to other people in their organization,
Right.
because it makes it acceptable,
Yeah. And
makes it okay.
I like your point highlighting, what is your job as a parent, but also what is your job as a manager? And, we both read Jocko Willink, according to Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership, your job as a manager or leader is to maintain the standard of performance. How can you do that if you don't give direct feedback? If you're always prioritizing someone's feelings, oh, I can't let this person feel bad. I don't want to hurt their feelings. Then you literally cannot do your job as a manager. And in my experience, I've seen just way too many people who consider themselves managers who basically spend their days taking meetings and then with their direct reports, it's like, okay, what'd you do? What'd you do? What'd you do? What'd you do? Okay, cool. All right. See you later. I'm such a great manager. It's like, oh my God. It's like, no, you're not. You suck. Like anyone can just be an administrator and just like hold your daily scrum. I mean, that's you're not doing your job. So anyway, maybe the thing that I'd like to also dive into here, and a part of like the basis for why I want to have this discussion is I came across an interview with Tony Fadell, who's a guy who used to work with Steve Jobs for like I think 15 years. He also wrote a book called Build, and in his book, he talked about assholes, and he actually had Steve Jobs in mind in particular. And I actually want to read to you Tony Fadell's definition of assholes from the section in his book. So again, this is Tony Fadell in his book Build, but reading from his book, he wrote, "Quote: Throughout your career, you'll encounter some real assholes. There are mostly men and sometimes women who come in different flavors of selfish or deceitful or cruel, but have one unifying characteristic. You cannot trust them. They can and will screw you and your team over, either to get something for themselves or just to push you down and make themselves look like the hero. You'll find them at all levels as individual contributors and managers, but the greatest concentration is near the top. According to University of San Diego professor Simon Kroom, up to 12% of corporate senior leadership exhibit psychopathic traits. However, you will also encounter people who can be very difficult to work with, who are gruff or loud or bossy or infuriating, and who may at first seem like assholes, but whose motivations and actions tell a very different story. So for Tony, the definition of asshole revolves primarily around trust. So can you trust this person or not? And again, for me, I believe it's more around intent, but I also like the way that Tony perceives this. And then he actually, in his book, goes on to define four different kinds of assholes. And so the first one that he defines is one, the political asshole. And he defines it as, quote, the people who master the art of corporate politics, but then do nothing but take credit for everyone else's work. These assholes are typically incredibly risk averse. They're focused exclusively on surviving and pushing others down so they can reach the top. The second kind of asshole Tony defines are controlling assholes, micromanagers who systematically strangle the creativity and joy out of their team. These assholes can never be reasoned with. They resent any good idea that didn't come from them and are extremely threatened by anyone on the team who is more talented than they are. They never give people credit for their work, never praise it, and often steal it. The third is assholes. They suck at work and everything else. These are the mean, jealous, insecure jerks who you'd avoid at a party, but who inevitably sit immediately next to you at the office. They cannot deliver, are deeply unproductive, so they do everything possible to deflect attention away from themselves. They will lie, craft gossip, and manipulate others to get people off their scent. And finally, fourth, the mission driven asshole. The people who are crazy passionate and a little crazy. They speak most frankly, trampling the politics of the modern office and steamroll right over the delicate social order of how things are done around here. Much like true assholes, they are neither easygoing nor easy to work with. Unlike true assholes, they care. They give a damn. They listen. They work incredibly hard and push their team to be better, often against their will. They are unrelenting when they know they're right, but are open to changing their minds and will praise other people's efforts if they're genuinely great. A good way to know if you're working with a mission driven asshole is to listen to the mythos around them. There are always a few choice stories floating around about some crazy thing they've done, and the people who've worked with them closely are always telling everyone that they're not that bad, really. Most tellingly, the team ultimately trusts them, respects what they do, and looks back at the experience of working with them fondly because they push the team to do the best work of their lives. So, Brett, a little long winded, but according to Tony Fadell from Build, these four kinds of assholes. What is your take? Do you agree with this kind of definition? How do you view it?
I mean, there's so many of these people that I worked with that are popping up that I think about with a bunch of those. I think the political ones are the worst. I mean, they're pretty bad. I don't know how many assholes I've interacted with. Gaming is fortunately a culture of pretty smart people and people getting after it. But when I left and worked at a non-gaming company, there was a lot more of those. And then controlling ones, yeah, those can be tough too. There's a delicate line with controlling assholes, right? Um, but I think that obviously the mission driven ones are the ones that exactly. It's like the people who have interacted with them over time are vouching for them, and that's the ones that you can say, okay, I understand it. And I think that's one thing that I do in my company that as I don't talk to people that have been here for less than honestly a year. I don't. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that I can be completely objective about how good of a job they're doing and make very objective decisions. But the other is that there is a certain style that I communicate with people, and if people haven't been around me for long enough, they may misinterpret it as being an asshole as opposed to as being very mission driven, right? Because it's extremely mission driven communication versus people who have been around for a year or more. I mean,
Yeah.
they love communicating with me because they know exactly what I'm saying, exactly what I'm thinking, exactly what I want changed. Is very direct, and they understand that that's in the best interest, in their best interest, right? Um, and the company's best interest.
Yeah, I think maybe the one other type of asshole I would probably add on to Tony Fidel's definition is like someone who I would consider like the cowardly asshole, which means that for me, because my definition is more around intent, it's like that asshole who will not give direct feedback, but it's mainly because they're too afraid. They can't do it. And so they'll smile to your face and they'll lie to you, and they may justify it to themselves as, in however way they want. Oh, I'll talk to him later. I'll do it next time. They never get around to it. And because of their own fears of giving direct feedback and making someone feel bad, they just can't do it. That they wind up, causing someone, like I said, the case where I've had a number of my friends fired with zero feedback, where it was a complete surprise. That, in my opinion, there is also that cowardly asshole, too afraid, and you know, uh, s- that other person um, suffers because this manager cannot give that direct feedback.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that might fall under the
Oh,
political
okay.
asshole
Yeah.
because I think a lot of the reason, I mean, there are people who are just they don't. Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of people who just aren't comfortable with giving feedback, so they just don't do it, and that's just they're just bad managers, right? There are a fair amount that maybe fall under the category of they are more focused on their career progression than the progression of the company, right? And
Yeah.
therefore, and then the company is basically promoting people that are well liked in the organization rather than creates results, which you end up seeing in a lot of organizations that aren't well basically designed. And so you have people who are picking their career over the wellness of the company, and then ultimately what's happening is that I always sort of like think you can't fake the world. You know what I mean? Like you can't
Yeah.
fake. Like if you're doing that, it's like it's gonna bite you. And I always, for whatever reason, am always thinking I'm running as fast as I can, and sort of this like shadow of the world is like chasing after me.
Yeah.
And in that shadow, you can't fake, right? You may be able to fake it for a little bit. You may be able to do the political asshole. Yeah, I'm doing this for but it's like that, like whatever it is, it's like coming closer. And you, it's gonna catch you. You can't fake that. You can't. Well, you can't trick it.
Okay.
And maybe in the short term you can, or you think you are, but really you're not. Like the world will swallow you up.
Yeah. I think another point that it might be interesting to talk about is just this whole notion. So I mentioned earlier that I feel like we've kind of moved to a society today that's really focused around feelings and making sure everyone feels good at the office. And that people in general are just so allergic to adversity. And kind of to the point that you raised about parenting, I think it might actually be tied to parenting, right? Where, because we kind of went through this helicopter parent phase where a lot of parents, for a time, there a lot of parents kind of shifted towards, I'm going to protect my kids from anything, and it's just about trying, which is good, but like it's like this notion of giving participation trophies, and like nobody loses, there are no losers, everyone's a winner, no matter your performance, you're all good. And so then this generation of kids who've kind of grown up with like, hey, I participated, and even though my performance sucks, you know you should still make me feel good. Where's my participation trophy? Right. And so then that generation has come into the workplace, and now we've got all these notions about, oh, whoa, 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 hold on, don't talk mean to Bobby, that's not cool. And it's kind of understandable, but I don't know, what's your take? Why have we kind of shifted to a society in which it's so bad to have any kind of adversity in the workplace?
Well, this is obviously just my philosophy around it is I think it relates to actually the the amount of large wars that have happened during our generation and during our lifetime, right? So basically, the most hardest generations were the ones that were born in and around massive wars, like World War II, for example. I mean, that generation is super hardcore. And if you look at that parenting style of people that endured World War II and the Great Depression, World War I, and a lot of them who immigrated to the United States. We're just looking at the United States sort of as our sort of bubble of parenting. They were extremely intense parents because of what they saw could happen in their children's lifetime, right? So they were preparing their children for the potential of another world war, another Great Depression, right? It's a very extreme case that you need to prepare your children for, right? But as we started getting further and further away from these very extreme things, and I know people can say, well, COVID or things like that, but if you think about the scale of impact of World War II and the Great Depression on our society, it's much much greater than anything we've ever experienced in our lifetimes, right? And so as you get further and further from that, you basically again have these parenting styles that are preparing for the perceived future. The perceived future is based on their experiences in their lifetime, and I think that impacts sort of how we perceive things in the work. Right? I mean, even the recession of 2009 is like the Great Recession that we've experienced. I mean, if you think about it relative to the Great Depression, it's not even on the same ballpark, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people aren't getting, at least in sort of most people's experiences. So I think that's why it bleeds into, again, like we're preparing for this perceived future that is rather cushy.
Yeah,
Um,
I just think that there are, and whether it's because of helicopter parenting or because of, and I think also to some degree working at a big stable, company where you will not, like, you're going to be living in and learning in an environment where because of the lack of adversity, it's going to be difficult for you to kind of, if you were to shift to a company where results really matter, like in a startup environment, you're just not going to survive. And like, I maybe I shouldn't mention this example of helicopter parenting, but hopefully my brother-in-law never listens to this podcast. But my wife, right? She has a younger brother. I remember years ago, she was getting a call, and I was just overhearing her talking. I was like, "Hey, what's going on? What happened?" And like her younger brother had, like, something happened to his car wouldn't start. And so I was like, why is he calling you? What, like, and like he's just like, help me, I don't know what to do. My car broke down. I was like, oh my God, he's like in his late 20s, right? Like, what what is he doing? And like, and so he tried calling mommy. Mommy wasn't there. And so he called his big sister. I'm like, I won't say the words that I used to describe him to my wife, but otherwise I would get canceled right here, right now.
oh man,
But it's like, yeah, of course. Like if people are raised in an environment where it's about participation trophies, it's about feeling good. You don't really have to perform. There are people, and even in our company, they'll join and they'll be like, okay, tell me what to do. And it's like, okay, why aren't you training me? And by the way, I don't want to work very much, but train me and teach me. And it's like, you're not, come on, right? And so I do think that a couple of points. One, I feel that people need adversity. That's how you grow, right? That's how you expand the boundary of your skills. Is adversity causes the surface area of your skills and capabilities to expand. And if you don't have adversity, then your skills and capabilities shrink. And so I think it's important to not only understand that concept, but then also to understand that, what kind of environment are you going into? Are you somebody capable of going into an environment where performance is important, where you will face adversity? Or maybe you're just not fit for that kind of environment. And then, hey, look, there are plenty of jobs. You could go work at Facebook or Google and just, cash in your checks, and just never never have someone ever say anything mean to you. You know
or
what
the
I'm saying?
world, or the world, right? Because it's like all these
Right.
things they release are great, right?
Yeah.
Because their stock goes up and it's like, dude, none of your products you've released in the last 10 years have done anything, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you worked at Google and you made a lot of money and everyone thinks you're great. Well,
Yeah.
what have you created? What have you actually created? What has Google actually created in the last, honestly,
Well,
like 20
actually,
years?
Google has done some good stuff like AlphaFold, but I would say, like, yeah, for a lot of, I think Google's such a big company, but the general consensus, right? A lot for a lot of the
Yeah.
people there, I agree.
How many
Um,
people are actually working on whatever that you're talking about? Yeah, exactly.
and
Although Google Suite's been awesome lately. Whoever the Google Suite team is, props to
I
them.
I would say Microsoft's a better example, right? Like, look at Outlook. I think they got no adversity on the Microsoft Outlook team.
Yeah.
Anyway, before I get myself into more trouble, then to this point though of startup versus big company environments, what do you think, Brett? Should there be a different policy of about having assholes, depending on whether you're at a startup or a big company?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I get that you want to be able to work while you're going to interact with more people at a larger company, but yeah, I mean, I do think okay, so there's spreadsheets and then there's sort of like the people is what I always say. But yes, in general, you're just the consequences of being nice at the compromise of standard of work is so much more extreme in a small company that you have to have the quote unquote assholes at the small companies because you will just die off, right? And that's probably why we see this bias towards founders, entrepreneurs being quote unquote assholes is because it's sort of a necessary thing for you to survive, for you to beat out the big competitor, for you to have an advantage. Whereas at larger companies, there's just a lot of things that you can get away with because of that bloat, right?
Yeah,
And I will say that one thing that we've done at Liquid and Grit to get away from this as much as we can, which I think is applicable anywhere, but it's harder at larger companies, is to really focus on work product. And I've talked about this in the past, but if you're commenting on something somebody has done, their work, that is so clearly a feedback to something that they can improve upon. And I really like this way of management better than just sitting down and saying they need to improve upon stuff because you're ultimately saying you need to improve, right? You're ultimately saying you need to be detail oriented, or you're ultimately saying you need to work harder and get this done, but you're doing it through an object that shows it, right? There's evidence of it, there's support of it, and you're doing it frequently, right? So you're
yeah,
and I think what happens in larger companies is managers get so removed from actual work product, which I think is kind of a joke, these people that just sit around and go to meetings all day long, that they don't really interact with work product. And I think to combat it as a manager, get work product and comment on work product, right? Like get I make people write what they're going to be doing this week, and then I comment on it. Like I just commented on this morning. This task that you define needs to be clear. I don't even know what this is, right? Like you need to tell me what this is clearly. That's a work product. Then I need to open up that document and comment on that document. And then I need to comment on the fact that, it's not done in time, right? Like
yeah,
that's a date that that person set. Those are all comments about a person that they can see and it's about their work product. So it removes the person, it removes the characteristics of the person versus if I let all those things happen and then a month from now I go, hey, so and so, Annie, let's have a meeting. And then I sit down in the meeting and then I attack them as a person. I say, you're not detail oriented, clear communicator, hard worker, right? I've now just attacked them as a person. And then they're much more likely to perceive that as me being an asshole because I'm attacking who they are, as opposed to over the course of a month, commenting on all of the times I've seen them be this way, right? And I think that really helps keep a standard of work while not being perceived as a huge asshole. You may still be
right,
perceived as an asshole,
yeah.
but you're at least saying, look at this, look at this, look at this, improve this, improve this, improve this,
Right.
right? And that has helped me.
Yeah, I think I think have a slightly different view from you in the sense that I think in my case I do also give feedback on the person, but I would kind of differentiate like um in my opinion. So for me, I would tell somebody I don't think you're detail oriented enough, or I think you need to be more disciplined, or I think that when people give you feedback, you immediately like start to make excuses or you'll attack the other person. So I will give that kind of feedback, but I won't give feedback like, you know, I think you're mean, or I think, like that's not associated with better performance on the job. So I think that's probably one difference that we might have. But ultimately, I would say that, again, for me, that's because my intent is to try to make this person better, the work product and the person better. But I try not to have it be more about like, I'm trying to make this person. So for me, a personal attack would be more around, I'm intentionally just trying to make this person feel bad rather than I'm trying to give this person some feedback and criticism because I actually think that that would make them a better employee or better person, that kind of thing. But
Yeah, and I think what ends up ultimately happening is people are applying humanistic qualities to an organization, right? And an organization doesn't necessarily have humanistic qualities or humanistic person emotions or considerations, right? It's the goal of an organization, in the most part, to be beneficial to society, to be beneficial to the people within an organization, right? And the means that that is generally through financial security and creation of value, not in making sure people feel warm and fuzzy inside,
right.
right? And so I think that's where things get diluted, or there's this assumption that businesses are supposed to just like feed people these safe places of work. Our society has kind of placed them as being in charge of medical, which is kind of an interesting concept, and now they're supposed to be in charge of our psychological well-being and like all these other things. And it's kind of an interesting thing that we've placed on the private sector, which ultimately I think, and this is my philosophical hat, like personally, I don't think that that's the responsibility of the private sector. I think personally the private sector is to create value for the individuals within the society and the society itself, and then that value is also contributed to the government, and then the government has the responsibility to do certain things that better over everybody in society, right? People who may be in the private sector, or who may not be in the private sector. And I would put some of these things in that category, right? Because if you rely on businesses to provides psychological well-being, well, what if you don't have a job? What if
Yeah.
you're married to someone who has a job, right? Like, then you don't get these benefits, right? And so that's why I think it's a weird kind of thing that we've placed on businesses
Yeah,
responsibility
yeah.
to do.
Like business have to perform. If you don't have employees who perform, then everybody loses their job, not just that person.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, and I know we've talked about sports before. We've talked about performance. The one other nuance I wanted to just add here, just I was thinking about it, is that one of my favorite coaches, despite the fact that he coached at Stanford, but I'll forgive him for that, is Jim Harbaugh. And one of his philosophies, which we've actually adopted as part of our operating principles at my company, is this philosophy about, he once told his team at Stanford, we win with character, but we also win with cruelty, right? And so I think that's a very important concept, meaning that, like, to your employees, as a manager, as a leader, I think you have to be looking out for their best interest. You have to, like, if the intention is good, if the character is good, if the feedback is very direct, if you're not lying to them, then the cruelty part is you have to do the things that's going to be best for the business. You have to let them know, hey, you have 30 days to improve, or like Elon Musk, do this by Monday or you're done, right? That's the cruelty part. It's the part where you're actually, at least you're giving them a chance. You're not like the, what I would consider a bad asshole, which is like, hey, Sally, surprise, but you're fired. You should have done these things by Monday, but I didn't tell you because I'm too much of a coward, but now you're gone, right? And so I really like this notion of winning with character, because, and we've adopted that as well because we want to be a character company. We want to do the right thing, but also winning with cruelty. All right, we're kind of far in, but maybe we could just wrap this up with one final topic, a little bit of a dicey one, to be honest, and to be, and
always good to end on dicey. Willpower is low.
yeah,
You,
because
s- you
go ahead.
well, you're just saying more, right? You're looser, so you're
Yeah. So, and I mean, I'm personally pretty like not political by nature, and I hate both Democrats and Republicans. So I don't belong to either camp. But I also think it's an important issue to discuss, and kind of as I opened with, is kind of like the current operating or political environment that we're in. And to some degree, I feel like a lot of workplaces are kind of being held hostage by employees. And in the way in that, like, because I think some companies are just being highly criticized to conform to a way in which some employees really want that company to operate. And so, whether it's some issues like work-life balance or remote versus in-office work, how do you communicate with one another? There's a host of issues that some people strongly believe in. They try to ram down the throats of the company, even if it doesn't follow their policy. And so, um, and, it's happened to me before where I feel like even if we have a policy, another company that has a different policy is like, you guys need to be doing it our way. Like, and it happened to me. That I had a lead of HR at another company's like, you guys have to have work life balance. You have to do it. And I'm like, well, I don't believe in that. It's like, no, 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 you're doing it wrong. And it's I don't know. And so just like I guess the point that I want to talk about is this political environment of trying to force one's views down everyone's throat. And I've kind of made this I have this kind of analogy where I liken different philosophies, different approaches to different flavors of ice cream, right? So you have, let's, if we were to say a work life balance company is vanilla and a work life integration company is chocolate, why not have different flavors of ice cream and let people choose the kind of company or the kind of environment in which they work? Um, so and we've kind of seen, I think, situations even on social media. You had like Kevin Hart, and he made some tweets that he's not uh that around I guess homosexuality or something like that. I haven't seen the tweets myself, but it was the point I want to make is like some people found tweets from 10 years ago, and there's these people looking to take people down, right? And whether it also happened to Frank Slootman at Snowflake, where he kind of talked about like work at his company, and then people just kind of like jumped on him. And I feel like we're kind of increasingly moving to an environment that's very illiberal, meaning like you have to accept what this mob considers how the world should work. And then the mob just attacks people. And so, to some degree, I feel like we're kind of living in a little bit of a crazy time. But, Brett, let me get your take. Do you agree that this is kind of the environment that we've kind of been moving towards? And if so, how did we get here?
I would, I mean, I would agree. I think it's very unfortunate. How did we get here? I don't know. I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I think there is some polarization around advertising. I mean, I think polarization increases clicks. So you've just seen a perpetuation of basically news sources being more and more polarized, right? Because they want
Yeah,
to get clicks. I think a solution to that is making news and information premium, and then you're more likely to give people quality information and not polarizing information, right? Which I hope generally happens, right? And I think that that is we do have a responsibility as businesses, similar to what we've been talking about, is to look at the long-term well-being of the private sector and the public sector as well, and make decisions not just on the short-term bump that we're going to get through clicks or something else. I debate this as in liquid and grit. Like people are always like, well, you should get on social media and you should post all this stuff on LinkedIn, all these other things, and ultimately I don't think it's really great for our subscribers to do that in the long term. I don't really want to bother them with useless stuff, right? I want them to work and create a lot of money, and then ultimately use that money to subscribe to our business, and then because we're a good product, not because we're you know showing some polarizing stuff. I do think that we are sort of living in a crazy world, and I think that I do a lot to try to protect myself from that. and it's very unfortunate. I I don't know. I don't know why it's gotten this way, but I think that like most things, I think that everything has to kind of start out with a level one, two, three, four, like a level progression, and it isn't starting that way, right? So people are getting really late in life before they have a discussion about something that um, they don't agree with, and then they're just not used to it, right? They're taking it, like we
Yeah.
said, they're taking it as a personal attack on them, as opposed to a viewpoint, um, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I just feel like we're kind of moving into an environment in which people are trying to become almost like predators, right? And they may rationalize that to themselves, but like we come from the game industry. In Game of War, you have like these alliances or these people that look for weak prey, and then they just try to attack them. And to some degree, I feel like there are these people who consider themselves like the ideological or societal police, and they're looking for tweets. They're looking for people that don't ascribe to their view of the world. And when they can find someone like that, then they'll screen cap the tweet from 10 years ago, or they'll like try to form these ideological mobs to take them down. And it's almost like I don't know, I feel like it's almost sickening to some degree, right? It's not like, hey, let's me try to understand your view. It's like, let me find somebody who doesn't support what I believe, and then let's try to get this mob together and destroy this person. It's like, what is so wrong with your life that you're trying to find and attack these people? And I think the other thing that also happens is like a simplification. It's not like people aren't looking to try to understand the nuance. It's going to be more like, oh, did you hear this quote? And then it may also be taken out of context, but it's like, this person is an asshole. Not They're not going to go into the nuance. They're not going to go into the way that we've kind of broken down different kinds of assholes, or thinking about intent, thinking about trust, thinking about these other concepts. They're just going to be like, here's my view of the world. I think based upon this, this quote taken out of context, we can attack that person. Let's get them. And I don't know. I just feel that so one, just like this desire of many people out in the internet world, these internet warriors, keyboard warriors, who are like out to try and get people. I think that's really, really terrible. And then the second part is like, then they also oversimplify issues. They try to, and even with current events around like the Ukraine or Russian war, people are like, wait a minute, Elon Musk tweeted about trying to, have a negotiated peace between Ukraine and Russia. Fuck that guy, blah blah blah. And then when it's like, okay, but wait a minute, Elon's also like, Ukraine would literally have lost the war if SpaceX did not pay for all of the internet, the Starlink devices that the government has, and he's one of the highest private donors, right? And it's just like but it's like the oversimplification and just attacking, and then like changing things to fit people's narratives because they want to attack. They want to, like, it's like kill, kill, kill. So anyway, I just hope that changes, and I hope that for people in the audience, I know sometimes it's there's emotion there because you might feel strongly about a specific philosophy or ideal, but I would just really, really ask people in the audience to like try to like de-escalate. Try, even if something does not fit your perspective of the world, try to listen to the perspective, try to understand why, and complexification. It's something I've talked about before in a previous podcast, but like really try to understand all of the nuances behind the point of view, and really try to then also think about, can we live in a world with more than one flavor of ice cream? Because I don't want a world in which everything is vanilla. I think that would just be a terrible outcome for us as a society.
And yeah, there's a bunch of different things that you've hit on, and one that I already spoke to, but I want to bring up again, which is that there's this assumption that the person who is pointing the finger is basically a godlike figure, right? That they have no faults themselves. And I think that's something that we've sort of forgotten, which is if you're pointing the finger at somebody, the assumption is that somehow the if that finger was pointed at you, that you would have no blemishes, right? Like
Right.
don't throw rocks in glass houses.
Right.
And I think that's what we're losing. And we talked about it with the asshole thing. It's sort of like, well, is there some part of this is good that we need to have a culture that accepts mistakes, right? And
Yeah.
accepts communication that may be perceived not in the most perfectly happy way. And I'll give you I mean, I'll give you and it might be a good thing. For example, I mean, this is kind of, we're bringing up things in our life. Like someone called my middle son a name at school, and my and he took offense to it. And the father is a friend of mine, and he reached out to me and he texted me, and it was a very nice text, that this was a terrible thing, and he's going to talk about his son about it and all this. And I appreciate obviously the text, but I texted him back, listen, your son, he said, my son is a good kid. I said, your son's not a good kid, he's a great kid, right? And he's learning.
Yeah.
And and this is something that I'm sure Blake, my son, has done things that aren't perfect. So I'm sure you're teaching him how to improve. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to judge him on this one action that A, I'm sure my son's doing, and B, I'm 100% sure I did things like this when I was a child,
Right.
right? So it's 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 offering the same judgment that you would want to offer onto yourself is
Right.
what we need to be giving. And that one is one of forgiveness and an understanding of imperfection, right? And to your point, an understanding at the end of the day, the intention is generally good, right? And with
Yeah.
kids, they're generally learning, and it's our job to kind of teach them to get in that path. But you're right, it's like now we've gotten to this point where if kids make mistakes, it's a note. It's like get him out of here, right? He's a terrible kid. Kick him out. Get him out of the school. Get him out of our community. Don't ever talk to him again, right? And it's like, well, okay, is that the policy that you want to apply? We had a priest was my sister's godfather, and very close to our family. And he would, when parents came in and said those kind of things, he would say, "Now I want you to think about this if your child was the one that we were punishing, right?
Right.
Like think about that, how you would want to frame it then, right?"
Yeah.
And so I think that's just the way that we need to frame things. How do you want your ideas to be received? How do you want your mistakes to be judged and punished, right? Not what you're just doing to someone else who isn't a god, right? Elon Musk is
Right.
not a god,
Yeah.
and nor is anyone else on this planet, as far as I'm concerned. So we get deep in the philosophy, but it did happen. It happened yesterday. I mean, I had this text yesterday, and that's what I responded. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just like, and also I'll add to that, to your point, JK, which I love in some of your blogs, adversity to my son is a gift, right?
Right.
He's getting stronger. He's getting stronger. Thank you. Right? He's
Yeah.
he's now overcoming that thing that's mild, and tomorrow he'll be stronger because of it. So realistically, you've just helped him become a stronger human being in a
Right.
in a somewhat protected environment. The next time might be harder. The next time might be harder, but guess what? We're preparing him. This is level 2. Now it's going to be level 3 tomorrow, level 4, level 5, level 6, right? And so in many ways, it's a gift.
All right. Well, I think that's a very nice and optimistic point to end on, Brett. So definitely want to thank you for jumping back on. I missed you, Brett. It was I miss these conversations. So I hope we can do many more in the future. But with that, for our audience, I hope there's something here that hopefully resonated with you in some way. I hope you found this conversation useful. And until next time, I will catch you later. Bye.